When my friend invited me to join him on a short trip and told me he had booked an Airbnb, I didn't think much of it. He was always the type to find deals online, and he bragged about how cheap this one was compared to the nearby hotels. It was in a quieter part of town, not far from where we wanted to visit, and the pictures looked decent enough. A small house with 2 bedrooms, a little kitchen, and some plain furniture. Nothing fancy, but comfortable enough for a couple nights. When we pulled up, though, the place looked more run down than the pictures had suggested. The paint on the outside was peeling, the grass in the yard was long and patchy, and one of the shutters on the window was hanging crooked. My friend laughed it off, saying photos online are always touched up and that we shouldn't judge it too harshly. I tried to keep an open mind. Inside, the house had an odd smell. It wasn't strong, but it was there. A mixture of mildew and something stale, like old carpet that had soaked up years of smoke or dampness. The lights flickered when we turned them on, and some bulbs were dimmer than others. The furniture didn't match. The couch sagged in the middle, the dining table had scratches all over it, and one of the chairs wobbled when I sat down. Still, it was functional. There was a bed for each of us, a working bathroom, and a kitchen with a fridge that hummed loudly but kept things cold. We told ourselves it was just a cheap stay, and since we weren't planning to spend much time inside, we let it go. That first night, we went to bed early. I was in the smaller room at the back of the house, and my friend took the larger one closer to the living room. The bed in my room creaked every time I moved, and I could hear every sound from the pipes when the water ran. At one point, I heard faint movement outside, maybe in the yard, but I told myself it was just animals. It was a rural area after all. In the morning, when I walked out to the kitchen, my friend looked uneasy. He said he hadn't slept well because he kept hearing noises in the hallway. Not loud noises, just soft, careful steps. Almost like someone was moving slowly so as not to be heard. He told me he got up once and looked around but didn't see anyone. I brushed it off, thinking it was probably the old house settling or maybe even me shifting in my own room. That night, things felt different. We had been out late and came back tired, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the house wasn't as empty as it seemed. As I lay in bed, I heard faint creaks outside my door. Not random pops in the wood, but the steady sound of weight shifting along the floorboards. The steps paused outside my door for a long time before moving away again. My throat tightened, and I didn't move. I just lay there staring at the ceiling, listening until the sound finally faded. In the morning, I asked my friend if he had been walking around. He shook his head. His eyes were red from lack of sleep. He said he heard the same thing again. Someone pacing the hallway, stopping outside his room, then moving toward mine. He looked shaken in a way I hadn't seen before. We decided to check the house thoroughly before leaving for the day. We opened closets, looked under the beds, checked the bathroom, and even the little storage area near the back door. Nothing. No signs of anyone else. It gave us just enough reassurance to carry on, though unease hung in the air. That third night was the worst. I woke up suddenly with no idea why at first, until I noticed the sound. The creaking was back, slow and deliberate. The steps came down the hallway, pausing again outside my room. But this time, they didn't move on. They stayed there. I could hear the faint shift of weight, like someone leaning slightly against the door, listening. My chest tightened, and I felt sweat forming at my temples. I didn't move. I barely breathed. The sound stayed there for what felt like forever. And then finally, after a long pause, it moved away toward my friend's room. The next morning, my friend told me he'd stayed awake almost all night, clutching a heavy lamp he'd taken off the table, waiting for the door to open. He said he swore he saw the handle of his door twitch once, as if someone had tried it lightly. That was enough. We agreed we weren't staying another night. We packed our bags quickly, barely speaking. My hands were shaking the whole time. We left the house and didn't look back. Later, after we were checked into a hotel, my friend decided to leave a review, warning others. A few days after that, he called me sounding rattled. He'd gotten a message from Airbnb saying the listing had been removed. Someone had reported that the host had a history of letting themselves into the property while guests were staying, just watching or listening without making it obvious. There were even claims that the host would sit in the dark living room at night, just outside the bedrooms, quietly listening for hours. The idea made my skin crawl. We hadn't seen anyone, but that didn't mean no one had been there. All those times we heard footsteps, all those pauses outside the doors, it lined up too perfectly with the reports. The worst part was realizing that while I lay there staring at the ceiling, trying not to breathe too loud, there could have been someone just a thin door away, watching and listening without saying a word. Even now, I still think back to those nights. I remember how helpless it felt lying in that bed, not wanting to open the door, not wanting to confirm what I feared. I still hear the creaks in my head, the pause outside the room, the shift of weight like someone pressing their ear against the wood. The ending was clear enough. We escaped without anything worse happening, but the memory of it still clings to me. That trip taught me something I can't forget, that sometimes the scariest part of staying in a stranger's home isn't what you see. It's what you don't see, and what you'll never know for sure happened while you were asleep. After that, I've never been able to use Airbnb again. I stick to hotels where at least there are staff and other people around. But even now, sometimes in hotel rooms, I'll wake up in the middle of the night and hold my breath, listening to the silence, waiting to hear those faint, careful steps outside the door. And every time my mind goes back to that house, to my friend, and to the nights we spent in a place that was supposed to be safe but never was. I booked an Airbnb for a short work trip in a city I didn't know well. It was cheaper than a hotel, and from the photos it looked like a clean, small apartment that would be quiet and private. I didn't think too much about it at first. I had stayed in several Airbnbs before, and for the most part they were fine. But this one left me unsettled almost as soon as I got there, though I couldn't exactly explain why in the beginning. The building was older, the kind with narrow hallways and paint peeling along the door frames. The entryway smelled faintly of mildew and cleaning supplies. When I first unlocked the apartment door, I noticed it had a double lock, but one of them looked flimsy, like it had been replaced quickly after being broken. Inside, the space was exactly like the photos, small but neat. A living area with a couch, a kitchen with basic appliances, a small bedroom, and a bathroom that smelled faintly of bleach. Everything looked fine, but I noticed strange little details as I walked through. The blinds in the bedroom window were bent in one spot, as if someone had pushed them aside to peek through. The couch cushions in the living room looked newer than the couch itself, like they had been swapped out. There was also a faint sound I couldn't place, like humming or a fan coming from somewhere beyond the walls. I told myself it was just the sound of other tenants in the building. The first night passed quietly. I worked late on my laptop, ate takeout, and went to bed. The only odd moment came around midnight when I thought I heard the doorknob rattle. It was faint, quick, almost like someone had touched it and then let go. My heart raced, but when I went to check, the door was locked, the hallway outside empty. I told myself it was probably the metal shifting with temperature or maybe another door in the hallway closing. The second night is when things got worse. I came back late from a meeting, around 10:30, and as I walked up the stairs to the apartment, I noticed the door was slightly ajar. I froze halfway up the steps. I knew I had locked it that morning because I double-checked before leaving. For a moment, I considered going back down and calling someone, but curiosity and stubbornness pushed me forward. I nudged the door open with my foot, every sense on edge. The apartment looked the same as I had left it. My bag was still in the corner, my laptop on the table. Nothing seemed touched. I checked every room, even the bathroom shower, and found nothing. After a while, I tried to calm myself down, thinking maybe the lock was weak and hadn't caught properly when I left. I forced myself to believe that explanation even though my gut told me otherwise. That night, sleep didn't come easy. I lay in bed in the dark, staring at the bent blinds. Around 2 a.m., I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. It was the sound of a shoe scuffing on the floor in the living room. I didn't move, barely breathed, straining my ears. Then came another faint step, slow and careful, as if someone was trying not to be heard. I knew I hadn't imagined it. My body went tense with adrenaline. The door was locked, but someone was inside with me. I didn't dare get up. My phone was beside me on the nightstand, and I thought about calling for help, but then the sound stopped. The apartment was silent again. I waited in the dark for what felt like hours, listening, my ears picking up every creak of the building. Eventually, exhaustion pulled me under, but it was restless, shallow sleep. In the morning, everything looked normal. No signs of anyone else being there. But I noticed one thing that made my stomach turn. The chair at the small kitchen table had been moved. The night before, it was pushed in under the table. Now it was slightly pulled out, turned toward the living room. That day, I couldn't focus on work. I kept replaying the sounds in my head, the chair, the open door. Something was very wrong with this place. I thought about checking out early, but I didn't have another place booked, and most hotels nearby were too expensive on short notice. I convinced myself I could handle one more night. That was a mistake. The third night was the worst. I went to bed earlier, hoping to sleep through the night. I locked the door, shoved a chair under the doorknob, and even checked the windows. Sometime in the night, I woke up suddenly with the sense that I wasn't alone. The room was pitch dark, but I had the overwhelming feeling of being watched. My skin prickled. I didn't move at first. I just listened. Then I heard it. The softest sound, like someone's breathing, coming from the corner of the room near the closet. I couldn't see anything, but I knew it wasn't my imagination this time. I stayed frozen, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would give me away. I forced myself to reach for my phone and flick on the flashlight. The beam lit up the room, and for a split second, I saw the closet door was open just a crack. I knew I had closed it earlier. I stared at it, the light shaking in my trembling hand. I wanted to throw the door open, but terror kept me rooted in place. After a long minute, I grabbed my bag, my laptop, my phone charger, and walked out of the apartment without looking back. I didn't even lock the door. I went straight down the stairs and out into the street. I ended up walking several blocks until I found a hotel with a 24-hour front desk. I checked in and didn't sleep much that night either, but at least I felt safer behind a solid door with security cameras in the lobby. The next day, I contacted Airbnb and reported what had happened. They told me they'd reach out to the host, but I never heard the details of what they found. I didn't want to know, honestly. All I knew was that someone had been inside that apartment while I was there, whether it was the host or someone else with a key. Maybe they had been watching me. Maybe they were waiting for the right moment to do something worse. I never got back the feeling of safety I had before that trip. Now, whenever I stay anywhere, I check every corner, every lock, every closet. I can't stay in a place without making sure I understand every exit, every sound. That Airbnb reminded me in the worst way that not all danger is obvious, and sometimes the scariest thing is knowing someone else might be silently sharing the space you think is yours. I never set foot in that apartment again, and I never will. I booked an Airbnb for a weekend trip because I wanted some quiet time away from home. The listing looked normal, just a small apartment in a residential area, nothing fancy. The reviews were decent, and the photos made it seem simple and clean. I didn't think twice when I reserved it. The place was on the second floor of a house that had been divided into separate rentals. When I arrived, it was late afternoon, and the neighborhood felt calm. The apartment door opened into a narrow hallway with a small kitchen on the left and a living room on the right. The bedroom was in the back, with one small window that faced the alley. Everything looked just like the photos, though something about the space felt staged. The furniture looked slightly mismatched, like it had been pieced together from different homes, and the decorations on the walls were generic prints that seemed like they had been bought all at once. The first few hours were fine. I unpacked, set up my laptop on the small dining table, and ordered food. Nothing unusual. But later, when the sun went down, I started noticing little things. The first was a faint noise in the walls. At first I thought it was just the pipes or maybe the neighbors, but the sound wasn't consistent. Sometimes it was a dull tapping, other times it was more like faint scratching. I told myself it was an old building and tried to ignore it. When I went to bed that night, I noticed the lock on the bedroom door was broken. It had one of those cheap interior locks with a push button, but it didn't actually work. I remember running my hand over the knob and realizing it spun without clicking. That bothered me. I didn't like sleeping in an unfamiliar place where I couldn't secure the room, but I pushed the dresser a little closer to the door as a small barrier and tried to sleep. I woke up in the middle of the night to a sound that made my blood run cold. It was the sound of the front door opening. Not the usual creak of wood shifting or a draft, but the distinct sound of a deadbolt sliding and a door slowly swinging open. I froze in bed, my heart pounding so hard I felt it in my throat. I strained to hear more. Soft footsteps moved across the floor, slow and careful, as if whoever it was didn't want to be heard. I held my breath. My mind raced through possibilities. Was it the host? Another guest? A stranger who somehow had a key? The dresser I pushed in front of the bedroom door suddenly felt like a joke. Nothing that small was going to stop someone from coming in. The footsteps stopped for a long moment, and the apartment went silent. I lay there in the dark, gripping my phone, afraid to move. After what felt like forever, the sound started again, this time closer, moving toward the back of the apartment where the bedroom was. I could see the faint line of light under the door. I knew someone was standing just on the other side. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just waited, heart hammering. Then the doorknob turned, slow and deliberate. It only moved a little before stopping against the dresser, but that was enough. Someone was testing the door. They didn't push hard, just tested it, then let go. The silence that followed was worse than the sound itself. I didn't know if they were still standing there or if they had walked away. I stayed frozen until I heard the faint sound of the front door closing again. I waited even longer after that, probably an hour, before I finally built up the courage to move. I turned on the bedside lamp, shoved the dresser out of the way, and carefully checked the apartment. No one was there. The front door was closed but unlocked, even though I knew I had locked it before bed. I didn't sleep much the rest of the night. I kept the lights on, sat on the bed with my phone in my hand, and stared at the door. Every sound in the building made me jump. The next morning, in the daylight, I tried to rationalize what happened. Maybe the host had come by to check something. Maybe they got the times mixed up and thought the unit was empty. I wanted to believe it was something simple, but deep down I knew it wasn't right. No host just walks in at 2 a.m. and quietly checks the place. I thought about leaving right then, but I had already paid for the 2 nights and had plans in the city that day. I convinced myself that maybe it was a one-time mistake and it wouldn't happen again. That night, I made sure the front door was locked tight. I even wedged a chair under the knob, hoping it would stop anyone from coming in. I tried to relax, but the tension in my chest wouldn't go away. I lay in bed listening to every creak and groan of the old building. Around midnight, it started again. The sound of the deadbolt sliding, the door opening slowly. This time, I sat up in bed instantly, heart racing. I could hear the chair scrape as the door pushed against it. The pressure lasted a few seconds, then stopped. Whoever was there didn't force it. They just stood in the dark entryway. For several minutes, I didn't hear anything. Then, faintly, I heard the sound of something being set down on the floor, a soft thud like an object being placed carefully. Then silence again. My fear turned into a kind of frozen panic. I couldn't understand what they were doing. Eventually, the door closed again, and the apartment went quiet. I didn't move until the sun started to rise. When I finally opened the front door, I saw something that made my stomach twist. On the floor outside was a folded piece of paper. No words, no writing, just folded neatly and left there. That was enough for me. I grabbed my bag, stuffed everything into it, and left without even showering. I didn't care about the second night's payment. I walked out onto the street, booked the nearest hotel, and checked in as soon as I could. Later, I contacted Airbnb and reported everything. I explained about the door unlocking, the footsteps, the note. They told me they'd look into it, but I never heard anything more. To this day, I don't know who came into that apartment or why. Maybe it was the host, maybe someone else with a spare key, maybe even someone who had stayed there before and never lost access. All I know is that they weren't supposed to be there, and they came back more than once. The worst part is thinking about what would have happened if I hadn't pushed the dresser in front of the door. or if I had fallen asleep too deeply to wake up when I did. I can't stop imagining what the footsteps meant, what they were planning, and why they left that folded piece of paper. After that, I stopped using Airbnb altogether. No trip is worth the feeling of lying awake at night, knowing someone might walk through the door at any moment. That weekend taught me a hard lesson. Locks don't always mean safety, and sometimes you don't realize how vulnerable you are until it's too late. I booked the Airbnb in Florida because it looked clean, bright, and simple. The pictures online showed a small but modern bedroom, a tidy kitchen, and a quiet little patio with 2 chairs. It was cheaper than most hotels in the area, and since I was traveling with my partner, the privacy of having the whole place to ourselves seemed worth it. The listing had good reviews and no obvious red flags. We had no reason to doubt anything. When we first walked in, everything seemed normal. The place smelled faintly of bleach, which made me think it had been cleaned right before we got there. The living room was small, with an old couch and a flat screen mounted on the wall. The kitchen had basic utensils, a microwave, and a fridge stocked with a couple bottles of water. It wasn't luxury by any means, but it matched what was advertised. The bedroom had a queen-sized bed, plain white sheets, and a big window with blinds drawn halfway. Above the bed, there was a smoke detector mounted to the ceiling. I didn't think twice about it at the time. That first night, we went to bed exhausted from the long day of travel. I remember lying on my back and staring at that smoke detector above us. The little red light blinked faintly every few seconds. I thought about how smoke detectors are supposed to have a light, so it didn't bother me, but I do remember it felt like the light was brighter than usual, like it wasn't just a blink but a steady glow that lingered. I brushed the thought away. We spent the next day out exploring. We went to the beach, grabbed food at a local seafood spot, and came back late in the evening. Again, we crashed on the bed. That second night, the red light seemed to almost follow me when I shifted positions. I finally mentioned it to my partner, half joking, that the smoke detector seemed a little odd. They laughed and said I was just tired and paranoid. I agreed. Still, the thought sat in the back of my head. On the third morning, I woke up earlier than usual. The sunlight was creeping in through the blinds. I looked up again at the detector, and this time I noticed something I hadn't before. Right in the middle of it, behind the plastic, there was a tiny round circle that looked more like a lens than anything related to smoke. It didn't look like the detectors I was used to in apartments or hotels. I sat there staring at it for what felt like a long time, my chest tight. I stood on the bed and got closer. The circle was dark and glassy, exactly like the front of a camera. My stomach dropped. My partner asked what I was doing, and I told them to look at it too. They climbed up beside me, squinting, and their face changed the same way mine had. We both knew immediately that it wasn't right. My hands were shaking when I grabbed a chair and climbed up to unscrew it. It wasn't wired into the ceiling like a real smoke detector would be. Instead, it had been attached with just a small bracket. Inside the shell of it was a tiny black camera, no larger than my thumb. The red blinking light was the indicator for recording. The worst part was that there was a small memory card inside it, which meant it had been recording us since the moment we checked in. My partner cursed under their breath and stepped back, pacing across the room. I just stood there holding the device in my hand, feeling sick. I couldn't stop thinking about the fact that we had changed clothes under it, slept under it, and gone about our nights without even suspecting. I kept replaying the image of myself looking up at that red light on the first night, not realizing what it was. We started checking the rest of the place immediately. We scanned every corner of the bedroom, the bathroom, the living room. We even checked the vents and the shower head. We didn't find any other devices, but the fear was already planted deep. We felt exposed, watched. Every shadow in the room felt like it was hiding something. We packed our bags quickly, shoving everything into our suitcases without bothering to fold anything. I remember my hands fumbling with the zippers, my ears straining for any sound outside. Every creak of the house made me jump. I wanted to be gone before the host came back. We drove straight to the nearest police station. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, paranoid that someone was following us. At the station, we handed the device over. The officer who took it looked at it for only a moment before confirming what we already knew. It was a camera. They told us this wasn't the first time they had seen something like this. The thought that we weren't alone in being targeted made me even angrier. Later, the police contacted us again to let us know the situation was worse than we thought. The host had installed similar hidden cameras in multiple properties they managed. They had been recording guests for months, maybe longer. The files were stored not just on the memory cards, but also uploaded somewhere else. The police couldn't even say how many people had been filmed. I remember sitting in the car outside the station after hearing that news. I felt drained, like all the energy had been pulled out of me. I stared at the road in front of us, but my mind was stuck on the fact that someone out there had hours of footage of us in a private space we thought was safe. It wasn't just the invasion of privacy, it was the idea of being tricked, of being so vulnerable without realizing it. The rest of the trip was ruined. We canceled the rest of our plans and booked a last-minute hotel instead. Even there, I found myself checking every corner of the room, every vent, every little electronic device. Couldn't relax. At night, I would wake up and look at the ceiling, half expecting another tiny red light blinking back at me. When we got home, I deleted the Airbnb app from my phone. I couldn't even think about booking another rental again. The whole experience left a permanent scar on the way I see temporary homes. A place that should have been comfortable turned into one of the most violating and disturbing experiences of my life. Looking back, the scariest part wasn't even finding the camera. It was the time before we knew it was there, when it was recording us and we were completely unaware. Those days where I felt safe but wasn't, that's what sticks with me. I can still see that faint red light when I close my eyes at night, and I don't think I'll ever forget the feeling of standing on that chair, holding the fake smoke detector in my hands, realizing someone had been watching me the whole time. The ending was clear enough. The police confirmed it. The host was arrested. There were files of countless other guests. Our footage was likely mixed in with all the rest. Even though justice came in the form of charges, it didn't erase the fact that we had been filmed. That stain will always be there. I thought booking a private space would give me peace of mind. Instead, it left me with a lesson I can't ignore. Privacy can be an illusion, and trust in strangers can come at a price I'll never risk paying again. I booked the Airbnb because it looked peaceful and quiet. The listing showed a small farmhouse in the countryside, surrounded by open fields and trees. It seemed perfect for a few days away from the city. The reviews were short but positive, and the price was much lower than the hotels nearby. I imagined long evenings sitting on the porch, listening to crickets, waking up to the smell of fresh air instead of exhaust fumes. When I arrived, the road stretched for miles without much around. The nearest town had been a 30-minute drive back, and after turning down a gravel path, the house appeared, sitting alone in a patch of green surrounded by woods. The farmhouse was older than I expected, with paint chipping from the siding and shutters hanging slightly crooked, but it didn't look abandoned. There were flower pots near the steps, though the plants inside them were mostly dead. The host greeted me at the door. He was polite, quiet, maybe in his 60s. He showed me around without much talking. The inside was simple, with wooden floors that creaked under every step, furniture that looked like it had been there for decades, and walls bare except for one or two old photographs. There was no TV, no Wi-Fi, barely any cell service. Felt cut off, but I figured that was part of the charm. He told me I had the place to myself, but I could tell he lived nearby, maybe in another section of the property. After handing me the key to the bedroom, he left me alone. I set my bag down, opened the window for some air, and tried to relax. That night was quiet, too quiet. In the city, I was used to the constant background noise of cars, sirens, people moving around. Here, once the sun went down, there was nothing but the sound of wind through the trees and the occasional snap of a branch outside. It was unsettling, but I told myself I'd get used to it. I locked the bedroom door, climbed into bed, and eventually drifted off. The next morning, I got up early. I planned to drive into town for breakfast and maybe explore the area a little. I packed a small bag, got dressed, and headed for the front door. That was when I noticed something was wrong. The deadbolt was turned, but not from my side. The handle wouldn't move. I tried the latch, the knob, even gave the door a shove, but it didn't budge. I thought maybe I was doing something wrong, so I tried the back door. Same thing. The lock wasn't stuck. It had been locked from the outside. At first, I didn't believe it. I jiggled the handle again, pressed my shoulder against the door, checked the windows. Most of them had been painted shut, and the few that opened were too small for me to squeeze through. Panic started creeping in as I realized I wasn't just locked inside by accident. Someone had turned the lock on purpose. I walked from room to room, testing every possible way out. Nothing worked. The air felt heavier with each step. My phone had one faint bar of service, but no data. I couldn't call or text. I tried pacing to calm myself down, but all I could think about was how I had no control over when I'd get out. I sat by the window, staring out at the gravel driveway. Hours passed, and there was no sign of the host. My stomach growled, but I was too nervous to eat. The thought kept circling in my head. Why lock the door from the outside? As time dragged on, I began to notice how quiet the house was. Every small sound felt amplified. The creak of the wood as I shifted on the chair, the ticking of an old clock in the hallway, the occasional gust of wind rattling the window panes. I kept glancing at the door, half expecting it to open at any moment. By mid-afternoon, I was pacing again, heart pounding every time I thought I heard something outside. I thought about breaking a window, but I had no tools, nothing heavy enough to smash through the thick glass without hurting myself. Besides, what if the host returned just as I was doing it? The thought of being caught breaking out made my skin crawl. When the sun started dipping, I felt trapped in more ways than one. The shadows stretched across the floor, the house darkened, and the silence deepened. My throat was dry, my hands shaking. I couldn't stop imagining all the reasons someone would lock a guest inside. None of them were good. Finally, just as the last light was fading, I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. I froze by the window and peered out. The host's truck pulled up, and he got out slowly, carrying a small bag. He didn't look in a hurry. He didn't even glance toward the house at first. He just walked casually to the porch, as if nothing was unusual. I backed away from the window, standing in the middle of the room, my heart thudding so hard it made my chest ache. I heard keys jingling, then the sound of the lock turning. The door opened, and footsteps entered. He moved around like it was an ordinary day, setting something on the counter, moving into the kitchen. I stood frozen, my mind racing, waiting for him to come down the hall. When he finally passed by, he gave me a look as if everything was normal. He didn't explain, didn't acknowledge what had happened, didn't say why I had been locked inside all day. I couldn't stay another night. The moment I had the chance, I made an excuse to get my things together. My hands shook as I stuffed clothes into my bag. I felt like he was listening, like he knew I was planning to leave. Every sound I made seemed too loud. When I walked toward the door, my stomach twisted. I wasn't sure if he would try to stop me, but he didn't. He just watched, silent, his expression unreadable. I walked outside, the cool evening air hitting my face like relief, and didn't look back. I drove down the gravel road, heart racing until I was back on the main highway. It wasn't until I was miles away, parked in the lot of a gas station with the engine still running, that I let myself breathe. My hands were trembling on the steering wheel, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I had narrowly escaped something I couldn't even fully understand. I kept thinking about the locks, about how deliberate it felt, how he had left me inside all day without a second thought. Whether it was habit, control, or something worse, I'll never know. What I do know is that I'll never forget that feeling. Standing in a house I thought was safe, realizing I had no way out, no control, no freedom until a stranger decided I could have it. That sense of being trapped in someone else's space, cut off from the world, left me shaken long after I drove away. I never booked another rural Airbnb again. No matter how cheap or peaceful the listing looks, I can't get past the memory of locked doors and the long, silent hours I spent waiting for someone else to decide when I could leave. It taught me a lesson I won't ever forget. Sometimes the scariest thing isn't what someone does, but what they don't explain. I booked the Airbnb because it was one of the only affordable options in the area. The photos showed a simple bedroom in a house. Nothing fancy, just a bed, a nightstand, and a small desk. The listing said the host lived on the property, but I didn't think much of it. Plenty of Airbnbs work that way, and I figured it might even be safer having someone else around. When I pulled up, the house looked normal enough, though a little old. The paint was peeling in spots, and the front yard hadn't been cut in a while. The porch light flickered as I walked up, which gave me a strange feeling, but I told myself I was just tired from traveling. The host met me at the door. He was an older man, probably in his late 50s, thin, with tired eyes and an expression I couldn't quite read. He didn't smile, but he didn't frown either. He just looked at me with a steady, quiet stare that made me uncomfortable right away. The inside of the house was clean but bare. The furniture was old, heavy wood that looked like it had been there for decades. No pictures on the walls, no decorations, nothing that gave the place any warmth. He showed me the bedroom at the end of the hall, handed me the key, and that was it. The room looked the same as the photos, plain and almost empty. I dropped my bag on the bed and sat down, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling. First, everything seemed fine. I left for dinner, came back, showered, and got ready for bed. I could hear the host moving around in the house, his footsteps creaking on the wooden floors. That didn't bother me. It was his house, after all. I got into bed, turned off the light, and tried to sleep. But sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up. First, I thought it was just from being in a new place. Then I heard something, a faint sound, like the floor groaning under weight, right outside my door. I lay still, holding my breath, listening. The sound didn't go away. It was slow, steady, and then it stopped altogether. I sat up in bed, my eyes adjusting to the dark. The house was silent, but I could sense something wasn't right. I got out of bed as quietly as I could and walked over to the door. The light from the hallway wasn't on, but through the narrow crack under the door, I saw the faintest shadow. It wasn't moving. My heart started racing. I crouched down slowly, peering through the gap where the bottom of the door met the floor. What I saw made my stomach turn. Pair of feet, shoes planted firmly on the hardwood, toes pointed straight toward my door. Someone was standing there, unmoving, like they had been there a long time. I backed away from the door, my breathing quickening. I didn't know what to do. I sat on the bed again, staring at the door, too afraid to make a sound. The feet never moved. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Finally, I worked up the courage to press my ear to the door, and that's when I realized it wasn't just standing. Whoever it was, they were sitting. I could hear the faint creak of a chair, the shift of weight every so often. The host was outside my room, sitting in a chair, right against the door. He didn't knock. He didn't say anything. He just sat there. I barely slept that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, every nerve in my body tense. Every tiny sound, the floor creaking, the house settling, the faint breath from outside, kept me on edge. I was too scared to move, too scared to even reach for my phone in case the sound gave me away. When morning finally came, the light seeping through the blinds, I gathered the courage to check. I crept to the door and listened. Silence. I opened it slowly, my hands shaking. The chair was gone, but I saw faint scuff marks on the floor where it had been dragged into place. The hallway was empty, and I could hear the host moving around in the kitchen, as if nothing strange had happened at all. I forced myself to act normal. I packed my things quickly and left the house, pretending I had errands to run. My mind was racing the entire time. I kept asking myself why he had been sitting there. Was he listening? Was he waiting? What would he have done if I had opened the door in the middle of the night? I didn't want to stay another night, but I didn't know what excuse to give. I didn't want to anger him. There was something in the way he stared at me earlier, something that felt unpredictable. I spent most of the day at a cafe, trying to figure out what to do, scrolling through hotels nearby. Most were either booked or too expensive. Eventually, I decided I'd tough it out one more night and leave early the next morning. I told myself maybe it had been a misunderstanding, maybe he had a reason, But deep down, I knew better. That night, I locked the door and pushed the desk chair against it. Not that it would stop anyone determined to come in. I turned out the light and lay there, wide awake, waiting. For hours, nothing happened. The house was quiet, and I started to think maybe I'd been imagining things. Then, just past midnight, I heard it again. The faint scrape of wood against wood. The sound of a chair being placed carefully outside my door. My stomach knotted as the creaking started again. He was back, sitting there, silent. I didn't sleep at all. I lay on the bed, my body stiff, eyes burning from staring into the dark. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, the way he had looked at me when I arrived. By the time the sun came up, I had made my decision. I wasn't going to stay another second. As soon as I heard him move away from the hallway, I packed my bag, heart racing the whole time. I opened the door, and there it was again, the faint scuff marks where the chair had been. The air in the hallway felt heavier, like the walls themselves had absorbed what had happened. I walked quickly down the hall, through the living room, and out the front door. The host was in the kitchen, and I could feel his eyes on me as I left, though I didn't look back. My hands shook as I unlocked my car, shoved my bag inside, and drove off without checking the mirrors. Only when I was miles away did I let myself breathe again. I pulled over at a gas station and sat there for a long time, trying to steady myself. I kept picturing him sitting outside my door, listening to me breathe, waiting in silence. I never left a review. I didn't want him to come after me, didn't want him to know anything more about me than he already did. But that experience stuck with me. I stopped booking Airbnbs entirely after that. No matter how nice the photos look, no matter how good the price is, I can't get past the memory of that chair outside the door and the knowledge that someone could sit in the dark, all night watching and listening without saying a word. The thought of it still chills me, because I'll never know why he did it or what would have happened if I had opened the door. All I know is I got out before anything worse could happen, and that's the only reason I'm here to tell it. I booked the Airbnb because it was cheap, plain, and simple. I didn't want anything fancy, just a place to sleep for a few nights while I was in town. Hotels were way too expensive, and most of the other listings I saw were either far from where I needed to be or booked already. This one popped up with decent photos, a low price, and the reviews, though sparse, didn't raise any red flags. It looked bare bones but clean enough. I figured I'd save money and spend it on other things. When I arrived, the neighborhood didn't look great, but it wasn't the worst I'd ever seen. The houses were old, most of them with peeling paint and overgrown lawns. Some cars sat out front that looked like they hadn't moved in years. A few people stood on porches, staring quietly as I parked. I told myself it was just a rougher area, and since I'd only be sleeping there, it wasn't a big deal. The front door of the Airbnb was a dull brown, and the lockbox was hanging from the doorknob. I punched in the code, got the key, and stepped inside. Right away, I noticed the place smelled strange, like a mix of air freshener and something chemical that didn't quite belong. The furniture didn't match the photos. The couch was different, older, and stained in a few spots. The kitchen table was shoved against a wall, with a single chair at it. The walls were bare, no decorations or signs that someone had tried to make it welcoming. Still, I brushed it off. I set my bag down in the corner of the living room and looked around. The bedroom had a mattress on a metal frame with no headboard, thin sheets that looked like they came from a discount store, and a lamp without a shade. No dresser, no nightstand, just the basics. It felt cold and temporary, like no one lived there and no one cared to make it feel lived in. I told myself I'd be fine, that I'd get used to it. That night, I lay in bed and kept hearing noises outside. Cars pulling up and leaving, footsteps on the porch, the sound of people talking in low voices, sometimes right outside the door. It made me uneasy, but I assumed maybe the neighbors were just active late at night. In an older neighborhood, maybe that was normal. I tried to sleep, but every little sound made me sit up and listen. The next morning, I noticed something else. In the corner of the kitchen, behind the trash can, was a duffel bag. It wasn't mine, and it hadn't been mentioned in the listing. I unzipped it out of curiosity and froze. Inside were small plastic packages wrapped tightly, stacked together. I didn't know exactly what they were, but I didn't need to. It was obvious. Drugs. My stomach dropped, and I zipped the bag back up quickly, heart pounding. That explained the smell. That explained the weird feeling in the house. I realized then that I had walked into something I shouldn't have. I told myself I'd leave immediately, but when I looked out the window, a car was parked right outside, and 2 men were sitting inside, watching the house. I backed away from the window, panicked. I didn't know what to do. If I walked out with my bag, they might think I knew something. If I stayed, I'd be stuck in the middle of something I wanted no part of. I considered calling the host, but the thought of getting them involved felt pointless. If they were allowing this place to be used like this, they already knew. As the day went on, more cars came and went. People knocked on the door, came inside for a few minutes, then left. I stayed in the bedroom, door locked, trying to make no noise. My phone sat in my hand the entire time. I wanted to call the police, but the thought of being there when they showed up scared me even more. I felt like I was trapped, waiting for something bad to happen. That night, I barely slept. The traffic in and out of the house never stopped. I could hear voices, laughter, the sound of bags being unzipped, and the dull thud of things being placed on tables. At one point, I heard someone walk down the hallway, right past the bedroom door. My whole body froze. I stayed still and silent, barely breathing, until the footsteps moved back toward the living room. By the 3rd day, I knew I couldn't stay there another night. I packed my things quietly, ready to slip out in the morning. My plan was to book a hotel no matter the cost. But before I could leave, everything unraveled. It happened suddenly. Just after dawn, I woke to the sound of pounding on the door. Heavy, urgent knocks that shook the walls. Then voices shouting from outside. Commands I couldn't fully make out but recognized instantly as police. My chest tightened as I scrambled up from the mattress. Seconds later, the front door splintered open, and armed officers poured into the house, shouting, moving fast. I dropped to the floor instinctively, my hands over my head. I could hear boots stomping through the rooms, the crash of things being knocked over, the sharp snap of commands being given. The sound of a flashbang going off in the living room made my ears ring. I thought for sure I was about to die. They stormed into the bedroom, guns raised, and I froze in place, trying to make it clear I had nothing in my hands. They forced me up, searched me, and cuffed me before I could even explain. My face was pressed against the wall, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might stop. The house was filled with chaos. People I hadn't even realized were inside were dragged out, shouting as they were shoved against the ground. Bags were being thrown open, drawers ripped apart. I saw officers pulling out more duffel bags like the one I had found, filled with bricks of drugs. When they finally questioned me, I told them everything. How I had booked the Airbnb without knowing, how I'd found the bag, how I had no connection to anyone there. They didn't seem convinced at first, but once they checked my phone, my reservation, and my ID, it became clear I was just in the wrong place at the worst possible time. They uncuffed me, but by then my nerves were completely shot. I sat on the curb outside, watching as they carried evidence out of the house. My bag was tossed out too, my clothes spilling onto the concrete. Neighbors stood around watching, whispering to each other. I felt like every single one of them was staring at me as if I was guilty. The officer told me I was lucky. Lucky I hadn't been caught in the middle of a deal. Lucky no one inside had panicked when the raid started. Lucky I hadn't been mistaken for one of them. I didn't feel lucky. I felt shaken to my core. When I finally left, I couldn't stop replaying it in my head. The reviews, the photos, the low price, it all seemed so obvious in hindsight. The place hadn't been an Airbnb in the normal sense at all. It had been a front, a stash house, a place where criminals came and went freely. And I had walked right into it. That night, I checked into a hotel, triple-locked the door, and sat awake staring at the ceiling. I kept thinking about how easily it could have gone differently. If the raid had happened while one of the dealers was inside, if someone had thought I was a threat, if the police hadn't believed me, I never stayed in another Airbnb again after that. The thought of stepping into another stranger's house and not knowing what really went on there was too much. That one cheap booking had almost ruined my life, and it left me with a constant reminder that sometimes saving money isn't worth the risk. I learned that the hard way,